Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for this kind introduction. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, back in Oxford. I well remember when I studied here. I did 1 year here at St. Anthony's College, started my doctoral studies, then moved on. And what I thought I would do here is to go briefly over how historians and presidents can have an impact, because impact is something that is much discussed in academia and, you know, goes without saying in politics and the world of presidents as well. So I came here in 1998, eager to have an impact as a historian. Might sound like a contradiction in terms, but there we are. I studied and finished my PhD at Queen Mary, University of London in 2003, and came home eager to have an impact. I focused on contemporary history, fishing disputes between Iceland and Britain. I can give you a long lecture about that. We won, by the way. And then moved on to other fields of current affairs and history in Iceland, including the presidency, the office of the President of Iceland. How should the president conduct his or her business, and so on and so forth. So even if I say so myself, I became somewhat of an expert in the history of the presidency and Iceland's foreign policy and contemporary affairs. And I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to change the public perception of history in some significant aspects. I wanted history to become less sort of nationalistic, not in the service of the state. We should point out that, for instance, in the fishing disputes with Britain, which we won, by the way, right wasn't always completely on Iceland's side. And we were not always united as the established version of history would have it. We had disagreements and argued about the right way forward and so on and so forth. So I wanted to get this message across. Now, how do you do that? Well, you write articles and you try to have an impact, but that is within the narrow confines of academia. So you want to write books. So I wrote books, and happy to say that some of them were well received, and I felt I was making an impact. And I also thought, well, what is the best way to get the message across? Well, use television, like move into doing documentaries. I wanted to become a famous TV historian like you have here in Britain, well, I remember David Starkey, Simon Schema. I want to do a history of Iceland, just like history of Britain, Simon Schema's, or Mary Baird, the classicist. Tristram Hunt, who was here at Oxford, if I remember correctly, always spoke like this as he had an invisible ball in his hands. So this is what happened, and now this happened. I wanted to become an Icelandic version of these TV historians. I had that planned in 2014, 2015, but then fate intervened, as it were. And I know, I cannot cover this in full detail, but in 2016, in the summer of 2016, I ran for the office of President in Iceland and was fortunate to succeed. But during the campaign, this became not exactly an asset to have been a revisionist historian, because some people would say, like, how can we have this person as president? He has been belittling the nation's achievements. He's been saying our history has been too colored by nationalism, and he's not trying to unify us as a head of state should do. Now, I of course replied that you should just try to be honest and tell history as it is, not give a glowing image of unity where there was no unity, and so on and so forth. Be honest, and that ultimately is the best way to move forward. And I'm happy to say that that message more or less came across. But it was in June 2016 that I was elected, and it was a fascinating time. Like, I'll give you a short day-by-day account. 23rd of June, the Brexit vote here in the UK. Iceland went forward in the Euros, men's football finals in France. 25th of June, the election back home, and I won. 26th of June, I turned 50. 27th of June, my first duty as president-elect was to fly over to Nice in France and watch Iceland play England in the same Euros. And I've managed to sneak in that we beat Britain in the Cod Wars, and let me just add that England lost to Iceland 2-1 in France. It was not because of my impact, talking about having an impact, but I was there in the stands, and we can touch on it later on maybe, the connection between history and nationalism and where we stand there. So, moving from being a historian, trying to make an impact, I had become head of state. And how do you make an impact there? Do presidents matter? Historians can matter. They can matter by projecting their image of the past and the present and try to have an influence in that regard. But surely presidents must hold way more power and be able to influence events in many greater ways than historians, with all respect to historians. But of course, presidents differ. You can take the President of the United States, where the office clearly has a political role and the power that comes with being the president of a superpower. But still, even there, the president does not hold unlimited power. We've seen that recently in debates about the closure in the States, and so even in political systems where the president has a clear political position, the power is not unlimited. And then we can move to the other side of the spectrum, constitutional monarchies, where the head of state is clearly not to play a political role. There's the series The Crown. I'm sure you do. And there's one wonderful episode there where the Queen's grandmother, Queen Mary, is describing to the young Queen, Queen Elizabeth, that you have to be impartial. You have to stay outside everything. You mustn't smile, you mustn't frown, you mustn't do anything. You must be the image of impartiality. And the young Queen is saying how difficult that can be. But that is in most countries, the duty of a constitutional monarch to stand outside the political world. Now, what about Iceland? I will not give you a long lecture on the political system in Iceland, but suffice it to say that the president in Iceland is outside the day-to-day business of government. We have a government, prime minister and ministers, and the president does hold political powers. The president can veto a law so that it is takes effect, but there is then a referendum. And this is clearly a powerful weapon in the armory of a president. Furthermore, the president plays a role in the formation of governments. And incidentally, that was the so my field of expertise was the presidency in Iceland. And within that field, the subfield was the role of the president when it comes to forming governments, because we have a system of proportional representation, and 63 now members of parliament, and now, in the last few years, 7 to 8 parties in parliament. So it can be tricky to form a government, and the president plays a role there. So there I was, having written books and articles about this, and all of a sudden I had become president, and we've had twice elections since I took over, in the fall of 2016 and again in the fall of 2017. So it's almost like you're stepping into your favorite TV program. Like I had written about this, and now I was involved in it. It's like, you're stepping into, now not House of Cards. It wasn't like House of Cards. And not the Game of Thrones, but you know what I mean. So you have an impact there, for sure. But, and to conclude on this introduction, as it were, you want to have further impact. And how can you have an impact? Because it was never my dream or aim to enter this position, but here we are. And once you've been elected, you want to be a force for good. So I feel that as head of state in any country, you should try to be a force for good. And I have aimed to speak for a society of inclusion and tolerance and respect, gender equality, speak for people who need assistance in life, speak on behalf of people with disabilities, make everyone feel that you're part of society. That's one thing. Sustainability, be a force for positive development there. The Icelandic language, it's a concern for us in Iceland that in these days of modern technology, where you can talk to your gadgets, your mobile phones, and so on and so forth, you can speak in Icelandic. If I had my mobile phone with me now, I would be able to ask Siri, "Hey Siri, how old is the Oxford Union?" And Siri would reply and tell me that. If I were to say, "Hey Siri, hversu gamalt Oxford Union?" Siri wouldn't reply, because Siri doesn't understand Icelandic. Now, will this affect us? Yes, it will, because if we do not do anything about this, the use of Icelandic, our old wonderful language, will gradually decrease. We will live in a world where we use Icelandic aside or next to English, and ultimately it will vanish. So that's something you worry about. Now, so domestically, speak for unity, togetherness, tolerance, sustainability, utilization, sensible utilization of resources, natural resources, where we give nature the benefit of doubt and think of generations ahead, not short-term thinking. And internationally, to move back to how I felt history should be written, project a true image of Iceland and its people, be positive where you can be positive, be critical where it's needed, not to provide a false image of a glorious country which can do no wrong, because it will just hit us if we try to do that ultimately. And work with others in the international arena who are moving in the right direction. So this is my take on having an impact as a historian and as president. Now, of course, I come from an independent state. It is small. We cannot aspire to play a dominant role on the international stage, and you have to be full of self-confidence, but also modesty. So I realize fully that as head of state in Iceland, I am not going to have the eyes of the world on me every single moment, and there will only be certain sectors where I feel that we can be listened to, and I think we should be listened to in Iceland, where people can understand that we know what we're talking about. Let's take gender equality, for instance. We can take that on later, where we have made great strides, still work to be done, but we can be an example there. We can show how it should be done as we move along to taking the next positive steps in that regard. Use of natural resources, geothermal energy is something we are good at, something we can project our knowledge and experience, and take pollution, ocean pollution. We rely still on fisheries. We won the Cod Wars against Britain, remember? We need those fishing resources. But we need awareness, greater awareness of the need to fight plastic pollution in the oceans and so on and so forth. And again, there, people can understand that we know what we're talking about. And therefore, our voice should be heard. I have tried to do this, but the one thing where the world really listened to me was on a different subject. And I'll conclude on that. Because it shows how much of a global village we live in these days. So there I was in the beginning of 2017, still fresh in this honorable position I'm in. It's an honor and privilege to serve in a small town in the northern part of Iceland, accepting an award from the college there. Afterwards, there was a Q&A session, which we will have here if I ever finish. I'm about to finish, only 2 or 3 minutes. And one of the students, a girl, raises her arm and says, you know, Guðni, we have had this debate in my class on pineapple on pizza. Whether we should have pineapple on pizza or not. And what does the president think about that? And I happen to have strong opinions on this. So I said, yes, well, as much as I enjoy pineapple, I just hate it on pizza. It gets all mushy and I don't like it at all. And if you take kids to sports camp and so on and so forth, you see the kids will always pick up the pineapple and throw it aside. So it doesn't make sense to put pineapple on pizza. If I had the power, I would just ban it. And hey, I'm the president. Why not ban pineapple on pizza? So it makes it to the local paper there. President suggests banning pineapple on pizza. The national newspaper picks up on the story. President suggests banning pineapple on pizza. Puts it also in the overseas, or the English version of the paper. So to cut a long story short, the following day I have media requests from CNN, BBC, Guardian, so on and so. It made the news worldwide. It's unbelievable. And I had to sort of clarify my stand, but I'll conclude now, finally. This story shows, yes, that we live in a global village, but it also shows that heads of state and presidents should not have unlimited power. I do not remember in exact detail my statement on the pizza controversy, but you can Google it and you will find it. I'm sure if you Google president, the next word that will come up will be pizza or something like that. But I wrote it down here and I have it here. And these will be my concluding words in this part of our wonderful meeting here. All right. President's statement, 21st of February 2017. I like pineapple, just not on pizza. I do not have the power to make laws which forbid people to put pineapple on their pizza. I am glad that I do not hold such power. Presidents should not have unlimited power. I would not want to hold this position if I could pass laws forbidding that which I do not like. I would not want to live in such a country. For pizzas, I recommend seafood. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the speech. Following on from what you touched on, I wanted to begin by asking you about similar comments you made in an interview just before you succeeded to the presidency. You said that you were, and I quote, most looking forward to being able to influence society and being able to connect with the public. So what one thing do you think that you've been able to do since being in office is it that has most influenced Icelandic society?
Yeah, apart from the pizza debate. Yeah. Well, I don't know. And I think a vital awareness in the mind of anyone holding my position is the recognition that you very often do not know. You do not have all the answers. And I think it might also be better for others to evaluate how I have had an impact. If I have to think about it myself, there's this danger that you embellish what you have achieved, I guess, and it's almost as if you're asking me something I would rather ask, next time I show up here, 20 or 30 or 40 years on, reflecting on my tenure as head of state. I'm still in the business of just trying to do my job as well as I can, and not thinking too much about the record or how other people perceive what I'm doing. So I'm trying to avoid answering it directly. But in political terms, I would say we've managed, for instance, to have elections twice, and the complex process of forming a government in a 63-member parliament with 7 or 8 parties, and we managed to go through that more or less without big controversies. That's one part where I claim to have played some part, and I hope that during my tenure I have been able to project this feeling of togetherness, that despite all the differences in society, despite everything we can do so much better, and despite the fact that some people are better off than others, and despite the fact that the essence of our system is disagreement and the right to say what you feel, despite all that, there is still something that connects us. There is more than connects us than that which divides us. And I hope I'm able to contribute to that feeling. That is my aim, at least.
So on the feeling point, you said a similar thing in the interview about how you wanted to try and connect with the public more than your predecessors and change how the public looked at the present and future of Iceland. In terms of the feeling, do you feel as though you've connected more with the people?
Well, first, I have the utmost respect for my predecessors, and it's one thing to be a historian and claim that you're an expert on the presidency. It's totally different. Once you enter it, then you realize that, there are so many parts of this that you didn't realize and will never be able to comprehend from the outside. So I think Icelanders have been more or less content with the people holding this office. And yes, with all modesty, I think that I've been able to connect with my fellow Icelanders and the people living in Iceland.
Then moving on to a slightly different topic, you've written also extensively about the causes and consequences of the 2008 banking crisis and economic collapse. And you've spoken previously about the lessons that should have been learned from that crisis. So I wondered, what lessons do you think have you failed to learn out of the ones that which you think we should have already done so?
In Iceland? What lessons have we failed to adopt? Well, of course, the banking crisis hit us severely in Iceland in 2008. It was, it goes without saying, an international catastrophe, but it hit us particularly badly, and something must have caused that, and partly it was because, pride comes before the fall. We lost our footing a bit. We felt that, and I'm generalizing here, so there was this general feeling in Iceland that we could only go from strength to strength, and we lacked caution. Caution is essential. This mixture of self-confidence and yes, we can do it, and caution and patience and modesty. But I think in Iceland we have learned our lessons from the crisis. It is popular now to do the 10-year challenge, isn't it, on social media? So if you take Iceland and do the 10-year challenge then and now, we can proudly say we're in much better shape economically, and we have learned our lessons. I am confident of that. We will never experience anything like the crisis of 2008, so we have learned our lessons.
What, on the point about having been so much more secure now than you were 10 years ago, what do you think the most important policy decision is still to be made to prevent any future or even imminent further crisis from having such a severe effect, if there is any?
Well, in terms of the banking system, making sure that we will not allow events to take the same course they did prior to the crash of 2008, and that is, not only for us Icelanders to wonder about, and one would hope that in other countries, people in positions of power and influence have agreed that we cannot risk anything like that to happen again. So taking the necessary precautions in the field of finance and in the world of finance, which is a world I do not know that well, that is a necessary requirement.
And then what strikes me as interesting is how, following the crash, the decision to prosecute the CEOs and the bankers who committed criminal wrong, I wondered how important do you think that was to change the public's perception of both the political class and the economic elites in Iceland?
Well, there was, of course, a feeling of anger and resentment in Iceland. The banking crisis hit many people. Many people lost their homes, lost their jobs, and the feeling of anger could be sensed in society, and people wanted justice to be done. So right after the banking crisis, it was decided to appoint a special prosecutor and a committee to investigate the causes of the crisis. And this led to, like you mentioned, prosecutions and sentences. A number of people who held key positions in the collapsed banks were sentenced to prison. And I am sure that the public in Iceland felt that justice had been done, and therefore people were more likely to accept the state of affairs and move on.
So do you think that helped foster a greater sense of trust and unity?
Yeah, there's still, the problem we face in Iceland is that there's still a deep lack of trust in parliament and in the political system. It's something we still have to work on, but there is trust in the judiciary, and that is one of the unfortunate consequences of the collapse. There was this collapse of trust as well, and we are still not in the position where I would like to see us there, but we are moving in the right direction.
What do you think you can do to help you move?
Well, contribute to the feeling among the general public that the system is fair and that it works. That is the key.
Then the final area that I wanted to touch on before we open up to the audience is that about a year ago in a speech you did at the Harvard Kennedy School, you spoke about how Iceland is not here to be perfect, not quite perfect.
Yeah.
And you referenced the Me Too movement's exposition of sexual violence and sexual harassment. And then I wondered, a year on that point, what progress do you think has been made on that specific issue? And then what are the problems do you think are most important to address moving forward?
Yeah, we had our Me Too stories in Iceland, just like in other parts of the world. I think it is vital that we continue to move in that direction, that we do not tolerate sexual violence or oppression of any kind. And I think it is important that in that regard that we tell these stories. I also think it's important that we do not create a feeling of witch hunts, as it were, in society. But we are not there in Iceland, I think. I think we can, again, if you want to get a sense of us moving in the right direction, then this might be one example. We are tackling what needs to be tackled. But like you said, quoting me at this talk in Harvard, despite the fact that Iceland is #1 when it comes to gender equality, and despite the fact that we have made so much progress in that field, we have these stories which will pop up still and need to do much better.
So now let's throw the questioning over to the audience. If you want to put up your hand and then wait for the microphone to be brought to you. Let's go to the hand, by the wall there.
Hi, thank you, Mr. President, for talking to us. I've been quite fascinated by Icelandic politics for some time already, because you seem to have lots of unorthodox figures in politics that didn't really take that usual career path. So like you yourself are a historian, your prime minister was a literature professor. And I would specifically like to ask you about Jón Gnarr, who was the mayor of Reykjavik, a comedian that ran on a very sort of comedy platform when he was running for mayor. Do you think this is, maybe what are the advantages and disadvantages of having these really unorthodox figures in politics, and is it maybe healthy for the society and for the political life?
Yeah. Jón Gnarr, the comedian and actor and writer, entered politics soon after the economic crisis, the collapse of the banks, and that's one of the examples of the distrust that people had in the political system. They felt they wanted something new, something fresh, a non-politician in a political world. And this is not, you don't see this only in Iceland. It's an international phenomenon. And speaking generally, I will not just focus on Jón Gnarr. Speaking generally, I think it's positive in the political body that you have diversity, different opinions, and not just one dominant route to political influence. I'm sure that was the case here in this country, that if you wanted to make it in politics, you would probably join the Oxford Union, and we want diversity. So and again, yes, I will safely say that Jón Gnarr was an example of that diversity.
Yeah, let's go to the hand.
Hello, Mr. President. Thank you for your lovely speech. I was hoping to talk to you about climate change and the position of global warming. Whenever I've been in Reykjavik, I always notice how prominent climate change is in Iceland. And you look at the glaciers, and you look at, for instance, Jökulsárlón, which wasn't there hundreds of years ago, and now, with everything going on, you're seeing the glaciers melt and the landscape's changing. So what would be your message to world leaders about climate change from the position that you take, in such a gorgeous country that's been impacted by this?
Well, quite simple. We have to take it seriously, and it connects to a certain feeling that there is a growing divide between sort of experts, the scientists, scientific knowledge, and the general public, or politicians even. Distrust in academia, distrust in science, and I think we need to foster a positive respect for scientific methods, scientific facts, and you don't do that through diktat. You don't do that through just saying, well, I am the expert, I know everything there is to know about this, the facts are there, they speak for themselves, and listen to me. That is not the way. You have to connect your knowledge and expertise with modesty and conviction, sort of engagement. And when it comes to global warming, I think this is vital, because you have forceful sectors disputing, belittling, or rejecting scientific advice. So when it comes to global warming, the message from global leaders should be the challenge is there. We need to face it. We need to take action, but not through this negative way of little engagement and sort of listen to us. We know. You have to have the connection. That's what I think it needs to be worked on.
If you just want to pass the mic to the gentleman next to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, President. I'm glad that you were a student at St. Anthony's, because I myself, and I see a few students from St. Anthony's here. And so looking back, what were the most important lessons that you got in Oxford, and also what will be your advice to us?
Yeah. Well, I had a lovely time here, and I mean, I know, some of you with your arms raised want to ask further questions about this and that, so I'm not gonna enter a long, give you a long answer on how much I enjoyed being here. But I would just encourage you to enjoy the moment, enjoy being a student. I mean, I'm sure, some of you have concerns about relevant or issues of many kinds, but for others, that is not anything to worry about. But basic point is, yes, basic point, enjoy being here. Like, I had such a lovely time, but I also remember doing, like, I did a DPhil, or it started as a DPhil here in Oxford, but turned into a PhD at Queen Mary at the University of London. You need to have the self-discipline as well. I can do this tomorrow is something you say a lot when you're just doing your own thesis, but the tomorrows are limited. So enjoy and work. How's that for a short reply?
Let's go. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, dear Mr. President, and thank you for a fascinating speech. And I really appreciate that you mentioned Icelandic is a very beautiful language. So my question is, do you agree with that English kills a lot of European language, and what the Iceland government will do to protect Icelandic and or even spread this language to many people in this whole world? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we should, the government of Iceland and the authorities in Iceland are determined to well, not protect. I never like to use the word protect the language. We need to just make it blossom, as it were. So, the thing I mentioned about the new age of mobile phones and gadgets and voice command and all that, that's something we need to get Icelandic into our gadgets, and we're working on that. But apart from that, we need to foster some pride in the language, and we're doing okay. I'm an optimist when it comes to this. These are just challenges ahead of us, tasks we need to complete, and I mentioned the Game of Thrones. You watch the Game of Thrones, I presume, or Avengers movies, or Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. All these are based to some degree on our Norse cultural heritage. You might know Loki from the Avengers movies. Actually, it's Loki, by the way. the evil god always scheming and plotting and annoying Thor, not Thor, or the way to Asgard, Ásgarður, is not Bifrost, it's Bifröst. But you know, this is just goes to show that we have contributed to, you know, our common world heritage, as it were, if that's too big of a word for the Avengers and the Game of Thrones and so on. But when you think about it, it's one mosaic in the great picture that is, you know, painted across the world. So if we lose all the languages, we lose so much. We lose all the diversity we need and we benefit from. Just like we in Iceland, you know, we read, you know, works in other languages, whether translated or not, and we benefit from that. So just like we need to protect diversity and advance diversity in flora and fauna, we need to do that in the world of languages as well. Everybody benefits, and I'm an optimist when it comes to this, not a pessimist. So við munum halda áfram að tala íslensku, alveg, hægri vinstri.
Yeah, could jump to the gentleman's hand in the back, in the blue.
Thank you very much for your fine speech. I particularly enjoyed your jokes about the Cold Wars. I couldn't agree with you more that we have more in common than that which divides us. You know, at this time, Britain is seeking to make new deals in the world. I wondered, given Ireland's reservations about, Iceland's reservations about joining the European Union, if you would consider perhaps joining the United Kingdom.
Well, if I were to say to that, yes to that, that would be sort of famous last word. Talk about, you know, the what-ifs of history. Now, this is not my period. You know, we historians always have our periods, and, you know, the 20th century is my period and the contemporary. But it was during Henry VIII's time, I think, that the Danish king was in financial trouble and borrowed money from the king in England and put Iceland as a what do you put it, like a collateral? Yes, collateral. And you know, who knows? Maybe we would have ended up as an English colony. Or during the Napoleonic Wars, there was an adventurer who sailed to Iceland from Britain and basically took over all power in the land. It was very easy. It was you know, you basically had to show up and say, I am now the master of Iceland, and that was it. The Danes did not have an army there, but after the Napoleonic Wars, Denmark was, you know, had sided with the wrong partners, and Britain ruled the waves and could have taken Iceland. So it is easy to go back in history and see points of diversion where Iceland could have come under English rule, and in that sense might have become part of the United Kingdom. But if I were to look into the future, I would say that I would find that extremely unlikely.
And yeah, to the...
Hello. Kom til sæl, Guðni.
Come to Sæl.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm glad to hear you again after having heard you in a lecture at my Icelandic course 4 years ago.
All right.
Yeah, that was before you were president. Seeing as you spoke about not giving a false image of Iceland, I have a question which I want to ask as someone who specialized in Norse literature and has seen the impact of the glorification of the Icelandic past, and how that has had an effect on like nationalist movements and other kinds of like extreme right thinking. What do you think are dangerous misconceptions about Iceland and the Icelanders? Takk.
Já, takk fyrir. Yeah, we need to defend Asgard from the evils of extremism. And you are right. In on the far right, there are people who proclaim that our Norse heritage is somehow their cause, and nothing is further from the truth. If you want to take an honest look at the essence of the wisdom of the gods, Hávamál, it is about modesty, it is about fairness, it is about justice, it is about respect for other people. So we should never tolerate the people on the far right who claim affinity with our Norse heritage. But of course, this is sensitive territory, especially when you look at the past. When you look at the rise of Nazism and how there were people in positions of power in the Nazi era who admired the Aryan past and Norse mythology. So this is our task. We should definitely make sure that we can respect this part of our heritage and culture, and avoid the far right, or oppose all attempts by the far right to claim this part of our culture and heritage, and we are doing that. And I mean, you just, it is there, and we have to defend it. That's it.
Takk kærlega fyrir.
Takk så leið.
Yeah, but let's jump to the hand on the aisle.
Hi. So, as you probably know, in the past couple of years, Iceland and other Scandinavian countries have always been sort of at the top of world happiness reports and other indexes like that. What do you think other countries have to learn from places like Iceland?
Yes, we are fairly proud of the fact that according to international surveys, the Icelanders are among the happiest people on earth. I believe the Finns are now in a number one spot, so we have to do something about that. We need to either make the Finns more unhappy or work on our own happiness. It's difficult for me to say or suggest what others might learn from us, because I know also that there are things we can do so much better back home, things we need to improve. Maybe it has something to do with this idea of equality in society, again with the caveat that we need to improve. There is this system in place, the Nordic model, it's often called, a welfare system, where you enjoy individual freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of love. You can love whomever you want in Iceland. But a safety net as well, a system of social security, where if you need assistance, you will get it. If your child becomes ill, the first question is not, can I afford the treatment needed, as it might well be in other countries, but the system is there for you. It's not perfect, but it is there. So maybe this contributes to this relatively high level of happiness when asked. This feeling that you live in a country where you can express yourself and make your dreams come true, work towards what you want to do, and at the same time the knowledge that if things become too difficult, if something happens, the safety net is there to catch you. I should think that this contributes to the outcome in surveys that we are among the happiest nations on earth. Yeah, I'm happy to reply like that.
And I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So, yeah, let's go to the hand in the back.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this insightful and fresh and lovely speech. I have a question. It's a little bit similar, but from another perspective. As you said, that though Iceland does not has a dominant position in the global world, but you did great job in a lot of areas. And last week, I think we just learned that from a global strategy lecture that the corruption rate in Iceland is extremely low, even compared with some well-developed countries such as Germany. Would you share some practice or some efforts that you did in this area from system or social or government perspectives? Thank you.
Thank you. Again, it's sometimes good to be abroad, because if you're in Iceland these days, the results of that survey are a source of disappointment, because the other Nordic countries are in the number 1, 2, 3, or 4 positions, whereas Iceland was in 8th place or 16th or something like that. So back home, people are saying, how come we are so much more corrupt or live in a so much more corrupt society than our Nordic neighbors? So it's always a question of perspective. I would agree with you. I would say, how many nations are in the UN? How many states? 200 or so. So to be in the top 20 is just excellent. But I will say, and in the safe knowledge also that this is being taped, and I'm on record here, that people in Iceland feel that this is a source of disappointment, rather, the results of this survey, and show the rising level of negative trends in Icelandic society. But let's make it a warning sign and try to do better.
Yeah, and then let's come to the hand, the woman in the top.
Many thanks for your illuminating talk. You briefly mentioned before documentaries in terms of your early career aspirations, and I was wondering how you would personally describe documentaries as having an impact upon us.
Documentaries, TV documentaries, and so on. Yeah, I mean, when I was a historian, I am still a historian. I'm on unpaid leave. I'm on unpaid leave at the University of Iceland. I felt that yes, articles are good, academic articles, but they are read within the academic world. Books are fine. People read books. Icelanders are avid book readers still, and you get your message across by producing books which are read. But documentaries, TV documentaries, well done TV documentaries, by doing that you catch others. You catch the people who are not necessarily going to read your book. And if your aim as an academic or as a person in society is to have an impact, let's look at the best ways to make an impact. And I think, I just love documentaries and historical fiction, like The Crown I mentioned, and I get the sense from people around me that people take notice. So, it's basically simple. You want to get your story across. Try to find the medium that is best for that, and that's why I love documentaries.
And then one final question, to the gentleman on the front row.
Thank you for your talk, Mr. President. I come from the province of Quebec in Canada, and you say that in Iceland you have a proportional system of government. And there's a lot of talk in Quebec right now to pass from a system that's more British to a system that's proportional. And some things that people say are bad about that is that if people are corrupt, it's more difficult to push them out of there. I don't know what you think of that, if it's a good system or, as a historian, you may have some.
Well, we have had the system of proportional representation in Iceland for decades, and I don't see any change there. I know, that in Canada and in Quebec, it has been debated, the move towards proportional representation, and all systems have advantages and disadvantages. And they say about first past the post system that you get a clear winner, a clear representative. The connection with the with your MP is meant to be closer with one-person constituencies. The downside there would be that the parliament or the body does not necessarily represent the results of the vote. Party might gain a majority in parliament, but only, let's say 30% of the vote or something like that. Whereas with the system of proportional representation, it is meant to make parliament reflect the will of the people. So all systems have advantages and disadvantages like this. So that must be my careful reply to this. Whether it increases corruption or not, I'm thinking about it right now and I just don't see the answer there. I will have to say I don't know, like I mentioned before. I just don't know.
Thank you.
So unfortunately that's all we've got time for. But ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in thanking President Jóhannesson for an insightful talk.